Right, we're live. And on that cue, I'm going to get on my bike, literally.
I think you should show people this bike. Let's see if we can show you this bike.
There we go. Look,
Bit of cycling.
I'll keep you updated.
See how many miles you do while
I feel like I'm got the upper hand on you here from a well-being point of view. You can
Yeah.
clearly see we're in together. We're back into live seminars, workshops, and talks, which is fantastic because that's where we want to session today. I can say that because you were delivering most of it. But when people now are talking about well-being, the big question, as I will aid people's thoughts with the ticker, is how the way they're working, how they're exploring what it is that's going well for them. And I think it's become massively important, of which we're going to point of view, Rach. How will you summarize the type of insight we gave today?
I think we're really looking at individualized, aren't we? I think that's the key. So we've got to be thinking about, and everybody is affected or impacted by challenges differently. So the way the leader, the way that we support as coaches is different based on the individual's needs, the individual's. So, you know, that's the key. And I suppose that's where we're in terms of our coaching, is that actually we're not going to do the same thing with more than one person, most likely, because everybody needs.
You're on a squeeze board, by the way. That's not my bike. It's a case of not necessarily prescribing the same conditioning program. Would have had a different program to me as a rugby player of past iterations before anyone chirps them. But that's true, isn't it? That's the same mantra for a business. Like, why do you expect that a policy or an for everyone when it isn't? And clearly there's conversations that have to happen in and around that. But how do you individualize such as that? What's the start point?
Asking the question, isn't it? So it starts with a conversation. It starts with our big thing is about measurements, isn't it? It's about looking at the data, about understanding from that really physiological perspective how this person is managing in those coaching conversations about what is it that's triggering these responses. So yeah, I'd start with data. I'd start with conversation.
Right, we'll start in the questions and mentioning those. We want to hear from people on the different platforms that we're on. Insight, you probably want Rach to cover more so than me. I'll give a review at the end of this cycling number here. But I think one thing just to go back to a little bit is what we're saying. Thing to understand, because we as humans will get by. We're pretty resilient creatures. Yeah. But how do you use that performance is a completely different conversation. So what we're saying is ask the question first, spend time reflecting, and I will just show this quickly, is around the data. So we actually showed this last year when it came in.
Yeah.
So 78%, the top stat you'll see there, of business leaders COVID hit. That is a pretty stark number. Won't surprise a lot of people to hear that. But shocking number in terms of 8 out of 10 people, certainly as leaders, not feeling they're in the best place. But just to underpin it with the stats that are dictating where they were 2021, so a year on. We're not talking now and present, but these are all from Bupa. They are available online. 36% think their employer is about mental health, which is a brilliant conversation. I'll just wrap up with the last two stats, then we'll bring you in, Rach. And working from home is better for them, as I agree with that. And 46% improve. So two numbers, both the 36 and the 46, talking about improvements of well-being. What's your interpretation from those pieces of information?
Well, there's been more conversation about how people feel and about how we look after people and how we keep well. It's been part of the social narrative. How do you avoid getting sick has been part of the social narrative for the last 2 years. So it's not really surprising that conversations are being had. Also, people now are looking to work in a different way, you know, and that probably reflects a certain population across the workforce. There will certainly, particularly younger members of staff who need social support in a different way, who perhaps don't have those social networks. support if they're not in a working environment. But what it reflects really, in order for our staff and in order to manage work in the workplace, we have to consider well-being. We have to consider how people are able to manage their mental health.
Right, I'll clear that because I think it's important we hear the number at the start. Everyone is individual. The conversations that are happening around people's mental health, being physically seeing in the workplace, and as people start returning back, that has to play a factor.
Yeah.
What things do for companies to say, look, we're aware of this?
Could we help? So that would probably frame it. How could we help? What would make a difference to you? And I think in managing all those things that we know we should be doing, or perhaps we know sort of at that kind of global level today, people need support to be able to put those practices into place so that they're healthy. Because when you're physically healthy, then you're able to manage. So I suppose the conversation needs to be about how can we support you to put those practices into place.
And that then hits the degree of autonomy where people who are working in that environment and what they think good looks like. And I think that's certainly something that we've noticed a change for. Companies and certainly leaders are happier to throw that question. Say, look, I know the answer to this question, which is where it feels as though some leaders are getting answer. It's a constant balance between work and life, and it's not something you find, it's something you explore.
I think if we had a wander around, what does that actually look like? How would work support your well-being? How does participation in purposeful gives us motivation, it drives us? So psychologically there's a lot of benefit to, but how do we make sure that there's that balance across both purposeful work but also meaningful time outside of work?
We spoke last week about throwing questions to people that were sent through for us. I think it's really pertinent at this point just to pick up that this works best if it is interactive. We can clearly give our thoughts, but it's nice to respond to things. There we go. So this is one question that came in just on the back of last week's work ethics chat, and it was around about the working disciplines. So clearly the geography has changed. We're now back in working parameters. Attack this question, right? So different scenarios, how can they try and promote working disciplines? Squeaky floors.
Squeaky floors, need to do a dance down on the squeaky floor. To understand whether the disciplines need to be different given different environments. So that the first question to ask: do you need to have different practices in the workplace and in work out what your objectives are the same in both environments? So perhaps if there's an opportunity to work, perhaps the goals and objectives of those days might be different. So then you'd structure those disciplines differently because your work pattern would look different. But if we good habits at home, will likely be able to transition them back into the workplace if we've developed them over the last couple of years. I suppose the challenge is making sure that we put into place the structure, those habits and that discipline, and that'll depend on what the habit and discipline is, really.
Yeah, and that's one much a case of them thinking about where they're working, but to talk about the how are they working. Because if you think about the hardware people can use, that's transferable.
Yeah.
If you think about the regimes and systems you can put in place, the slots, that's all transferable. What the experience factors. So how stimulus change. We're in rooms now where that's a paralysis of choice rather than, look, that's all I've got to think about. So those things, as we say, through everything, being aware of actually half an hour and then mingle with a collaborative area for an hour and a half after it. They're the things that you need to explore a little bit more. And I don't, which this is the second question coming through, and it might be a tough question. So here we go. How do I ask my boss if I want to work at?
Well, it is, isn't it? And I guess there's a balance to be had, isn't there, around workplace demands and also individual requirements, you know, and that, I suppose that's a conversation that all businesses will need to have. For your staff to be in the office at all times, and if it's not, then what does that balance look like? But also, I think, you know, that it seems appealing to be the space of an office and the stimulation of an office isn't helpful, then perhaps the home environment allows them to be more productive. But we're inherently social creatures, so we support us. So I think the ideal would be a bit of a balance of both, for that flux between the, you know, the different elements of our personalities.
Yeah, they're not affected by where you work, it's how you work. That's very important too. I'm noticing a bit of connection issue here, so hopefully this all comes through. Just to wrap it up then, Rach, you know, people are talking about short-termism. Is this a long-term game plan? What do you think is the overriding message from this chat?
Long term, that, you know, if you're returning to the workplace, immediate, because we're going to have to readjust, aren't we? So we've got to readjust both in terms of our working practice, but also just in terms of our life management. So unless there's a real business move towards our new norm, maybe it needs a little bit of flux over the next.
And cycle update, I'm now officially sweating 33 minutes in with the last session. Decent amount of calories. Join us next week. We'll hopefully have a better connection. But other than that, do feel free to fire through the questions. It's been a pleasure to chat.